History of the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade, spanning roughly from 1526 to 1867, was a brutal system of human trafficking driven by European colonial demands for labor in the Americas to support plantations producing sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other commodities. It involved the forced capture and transport of an estimated 12.5 to 13 million Africans across the Atlantic, with about 10.7 to 11 million surviving the Middle Passage to reach the New World. The trade was dominated initially by the Portuguese in the 16th century, followed by the British, who transported about 3.4 million between 1640 and 1807, Dutch, French, Spanish, and others, often in partnership with African coastal kingdoms and warlords who supplied captives from interior wars fueled by the trade itself. The trade's impact on Africa was catastrophic and enduring. It depopulated regions, particularly in West and Central Africa, removing prime-age laborers and disrupting societies. Estimates suggest 70,000 to 100,000 people were exported annually at its peak in the 18th century. This ruined Africa by incentivizing endemic warfare among tribes to capture slaves, eroding traditional economies, and fostering corruption among elites who profited from European goods like guns and textiles. Long-term effects included stunted economic development, reduced ethnic diversity in affected areas, as groups were selectively targeted, weakened institutions, and persistent poverty. Studies link slave export intensity to lower modern GDP per capita and trust levels in societies. Demographically, it skewed gender ratios, more men exported, hampered population growth, and contributed to the continent's underdevelopment, with ripple effects like famine and disease outbreaks from social collapse. While internal African slavery predated the trade, the transatlantic scale amplified exploitation, turning human beings into commodities and leaving scars that compounded colonial conquests later. How autism or Asperger's syndrome fits into colonial slavery. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, including what was once called Asperger's syndrome, was not formally identified until the 1940s, so historical records from the colonial era, roughly 1600s, 1770s, do not use these terms. Instead, individuals exhibiting autistic traits such as sensory sensitivities, repetitive behaviors, social withdrawal, or savant abilities were often labeled as idiots, lunatics, simpletons, or possessed, and their treatment intersected brutally with the dehumanizing logic of slavery. In colonial slavery, enslaved Africans with disabilities, including those we might now recognize as neurodivergent, faced compounded exploitation. European colonizers viewed disability as a commodity or liability. Defective slaves could be sold cheaply for domestic work, or worse, to physicians for unethical experiments, as colonial medicine often used enslaved people as test subjects without consent. Autistic traits like echolalia or intense focus might have been misinterpreted as savagery or inferiority, reinforcing pseudoscientific racism that justified enslavement. Rare savant skills, e.g., exceptional memory or mimicry, could lead to exhibition as curiosities for profit, similar to later cases, but most neurodivergent enslaved people endured neglect, abuse, or infanticide if deemed unproductive. The era's mental health rhetoric framed enslaved suffering as inherent weakness, ignoring trauma's role, and colonial laws rarely protected the disabled, treating them as disposable property. Overall, autism-like traits likely amplified vulnerability in a system that prized physical labor over humanity. How autism or Asperger's syndrome fits into antebellum slavery. Antebellum slavery, pre-Civil War South 1812, South 1860, similarly lacked modern diagnostic frameworks, but disabilities were systematically managed as economic assets or burdens. Enslaved people with autistic traits were often categorized under broad impairments, facing sale to medical practitioners for vivisections or asylums, where they endured experimental cures like bleeding or restraint. This era's pro-slavery ideology stereotyped black people as inherently childlike or deficient, which could mask or exacerbate neurodivergence. Traits like nonverbal communication or meltdowns were punished as insolence, leading to whippings or family separations. Paradoxically, those with savant abilities, e.g., prodigious musical or mathematical talents, were commodified as wondrous freaks to humanize slavery for white audiences, profiting owners while denying autonomy. Less valuable individuals were kept for lighter tasks but at risk of sale if plantations prioritized profit. Families with disabled members faced heightened separation fears, though some owners retained them to avoid wasting property. Medical texts from the time pathologized enslaved mental health as racial flaws, ignoring environmental trauma, and contributed to views that disability justified enslavement. In essence, antebellum slavery amplified ableism within racism, turning neurodivergence into a tool for control and spectacle. Benjamin Banneker, 1731–1806, was a free African-American polymath, self-taught, astronomer, mathematician, naturalist, farmer, almanac author from Maryland. Raised on a tobacco farm with little formal schooling, he taught himself using borrowed books and instruments, pursuing numbers and the night sky. In 1753, he built a striking wooden clock from a pocket watch. It was among the earliest clocks made entirely in colonial America. By the 1790s, Banneker computed ephemerides. He predicted eclipses. He published almanacs. Those almanacs included astronomy tables. They listed tides, they listed weather, and they carried essays against slavery. In 1791, at age 59, he joined Andrew Ellicott's six-man team. They surveyed the 10-mile square for the new federal district along the Potomac. Using a chronometer and stellar observations, he helped fix boundary points and mile marker stones. That was foundational work for what became Washington, D.C. His role was boundary surveying, not the city's street plan. Pierre L'Enfant's design set the grand avenues and circles. Banneker sent his almanac to Thomas Jefferson with a letter denouncing slavery and urging America to honor its own ideals. He lived modestly. He never married. He died in 1806. A fire the day of his funeral destroyed many papers, but his astronomical journal survives. Today, Banneker stands as a symbol of Black scientific excellence. Rigor, curiosity, courage can reshape a nation's course. What early abolitionists did and how slavery ended. Early abolitionists, active from the late 1700s, employed moral suasion, political agitation, and direct action to dismantle slavery. Quakers like John Woolman preached against it in the 1750s, while figures like Benjamin Franklin petitioned Congress in 1790. The American Colonization Society, 1816, aimed to resettle free blacks in Africa, though criticized as deportation. Radicals like William Lloyd Garrison founded The Liberator, 1831, demanding immediate emancipation, and Frederick Douglass's 1845 autobiography exposed slavery's horrors. Women like Sojourner Truth lectured on intersectional oppression, and Harriet Tubman led Zarish 70 enslaved people to freedom via the Underground Railroad. Tactics included boycotts of slave-produced goods, petitions, millions signed, sparking the 1836 gag rule backlash, and publications like Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, 1852, which sold 300,000 copies and swayed public opinion. Slavery ended through escalating crises. Northern states gradually abolished it, e.g. Pennsylvania 1780, Vermont 1777 outright. The 1820 Missouri Compromise and 1850 Fugitive Slave Act inflamed tensions, culminating in the 1859 John Brown raid and 1860 Lincoln election. The Civil War, 1861–1865, was pivotal. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, freed slaves in Confederate states, and alliances between abolitionists, enslaved self-liberators. Hundreds of thousands fled to Union lines, and black troops pressured the South. The 13th Amendment, ratified December 6, 1865, formally abolished slavery nationwide. What happened to Blind Tom Wiggins? Thomas Blind Tom Wiggins, 1849–1908, born enslaved in Georgia, was blind from birth and retrospectively diagnosed as an autistic savant with extraordinary musical talent. He could improvise complex pieces after one hearing and performed for presidents and queens. Purchased as an infant by lawyer James Bethune, self-titled Colonel, Tom was isolated, beaten for disobedience, and forced to practice piano obsessively from age 4, with earnings from tours funding Bethune's lifestyle. Exploited relentlessly from age 8, he toured the US and Europe as a prodigy freak, performing up to 9,000 concerts, often in blackface or under duress, generating millions, equivalent to 100 Memiplex today, that Tom never controlled. Bethune claimed guardianship post-emancipation via legal loopholes, denying him autonomy. Abused physically and emotionally, e.g., chained, mocked for echolalia, he developed coping mechanisms like scripting speeches. In 1883, a New York court briefly freed him, but Bethune regained control. Tom died at 59 from pneumonia, buried unmarked until 1929 reinterment. His story exemplifies slavery's lingering exploitation of disabled black talent. Under Jim Crow, separate but equal meant rigid segregation, racism, ableism. Archival signs mark the divide. Colored hospitals and asylums, chronic underfunding, overcrowding, neglect. During the eugenics era, labels like feeble-minded enabled coerced sterilizations and lifelong confinement on streets and buses. Stimming, limited eye contact, delayed responses could be misread as vagrancy, misread as insolence, or disorderly conduct, risking arrest, risking violence, or worse. Courthouses processed these cases quickly. Newspapers normalized suspicion. Schools were segregated, resource poor. Special education services were rare or non-existent. Students were misclassified as slow or as delinquent, facing high suspension rates, facing high dropout rates. Many never received literacy support, nor vocational support. Medical bias ran deep. Autism was seldom diagnosed, behavior dismissed as laziness, or labeled a cultural deficit. Without accurate assessment, families got stigma instead of services. In response, families protected their own, keeping loved ones close, avoiding institutions, leaning on churches, leaning on neighborhood networks. Community choirs offered structure, mutual aid circles provided help, front porch vigilance offered safety and dignity. A few were showcased as savants to make ends meet, but most who entered state training schools encountered regimentation, encountered neglect, encountered abuse. Others drifted into homelessness, over-policed, overlooked. By mid-century, they were overrepresented in institutions, increasingly in jails and prisons. Yet those decades forged alliances to challenge segregation and to challenge disability exclusion, laying groundwork for civil rights and the modern disability rights movement. The bench is empty now. The placards still speak. Change was coming, but its cost had already been paid by generations forced to survive in the shadows. From Jim Crow's shadow, 1954, a new mandate. Brown versus Board declares segregated schools. Unconstitutional autism wasn't part of school policy debates. Autism entered the DSM in 1980, 1955 launched 56, Montgomery bus boycott, 1963, March on Washington. The era reshaped public space. Autism awareness remained nascent and uneven. As districts desegregated, Black autistic students gained entry to better resourced schools, but benefits were indirect and unequal. Inside classrooms and clinics, misdiagnosis and late diagnosis shadowed the era. Behaviors were read as oppositional or disruptive. Clinician bias, delayed assessments, poverty, delayed assessments. Waiting rooms closed early, referrals got lost. Relief came late or not at all. Some families heard autism dismissed as a white diagnosis. Skepticism slowed help, even as needs grew. In public spaces, over-policing of unusual behavior increased risk. Stimming flat effect delayed responses. Those behaviors could trigger escalation. Courthouse routines moved fast. Institutional doors stayed open. the pipeline to confinement lingered from earlier decades. By the early 1970s, voices within medicine took note. Psychiatrist Alvin Poussin in 1972 highlighted diagnostic gaps for Black children, movement health wings, free clinics, screenings, breakfast programs, expanded access, yet disability rights advanced on a separate track. Policy followed later. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975 guaranteed school services downstream from civil rights, but decisive summary. Progress, then limits. Gains in access, but uneven intersectional advocacy would grow next to confront compounded barriers. Fade in, emergence, and early challenges. 1960s to 1980s. Autism existed in the shadows, often confused with schizophrenia or intellectual disability. For Black families, awareness was minimal amid civil rights struggles. Behaviors like social withdrawal or repetitive motions were mislabeled behavioral or emotional disorders. Many children were routed into segregated special education or juvenile facilities. Services rarely fit their needs. Stigma cut deep. Autism was framed through a white lens. Traits in Black youth were misread as defiance or trauma, delaying help. Personal histories, like Perry Benjamin Hall's, reveal institutionalization, family shame, and little community support. By 1980, DSM-3 defined autism more clearly, yet disparities persisted. Clinician bias and access barriers left Black children underdiagnosed and underserved. Mistrust, shaped by abuses like Tuskegee, further delayed evaluations. Early studies hinted at higher risks, but equitable screening lagged. Asperger's remained obscure. High-functioning labels ignored the added weight of racism and masking. Rising awareness and widening gaps. 1990s to 2000s. DSM-4 added Asperger's in 1994. IDEA opened school services. Yet Black children were far less likely to receive timely autism evaluations. Many were identified only after co-occurring intellectual disability appeared. Controversies around early vaccine studies fueled hesitancy in already skeptical communities. Parents described isolation, where autism was called weakness or punishment. Advocates emerged, building support groups and naming racial profiling as a sensory risk. Advocacy boom and intersectional focus, 2010s to present. Neurodiversity voices grew. Autism in Black Bass, The Color of Autism. Films reduced isolation. Workshops reduced isolation. Online forums reduced isolation. Prevalence in Black children rose with better screening. But diagnoses still came late. Girls were missed more often. Masking was praised as resilience. Barriers endure. Racism and discipline, few culturally competent clinicians, and overrepresentation in child welfare and prisons. Yet empowerment expands. Be Fast and local networks connect families to services. Writers and organizers elevate Black autistic voices worldwide. Social media preserves lived histories, misdiagnosis, survival, and pride. From invisibility to intersectional advocacy, the work continues toward timely, equitable care for all. Fade out.